Virtus Verbis Podcast disclaimer. The information presented in this podcast is for entertainment, informational and educational purposes only. It is not intended as legal, professional, or financial advice and should not be construed as such. Content and topics shown or discussed may not be accurate nor up-to-date information. Laws and regulations change frequently and vary by location, jurisdiction, and by nation. You should consult with a qualified legal or financial professional for advice specific to your situation. Listening to this podcast does not create an attorney-client relationship. The views expressed by the host and guests are their own and do not reflect the views of the podcast as a whole. The host is not responsible for any errors or omissions in the information provided or for any actions taken based on the content of this podcast. We are not liable for any losses, damages, or consequences arising from the use of this information. By listening to this podcast, you agree to hold the host and any guests harmless from any decisions you make, or from any losses, damages, or other claims arising from your use of this information.
Yep. Sounds good.
All right. So this episode, I think the narrative or the theme that we're going with is bad bosses. It won't all be about bad bosses. I think we'll contrast it with good bosses, or more importantly, what did we learn through our past work experience, and we'll go from there. I definitely have a lot of interesting stories. But before we go into any of mine, I'm gonna pass it over to you, and you can share one of your early ones, I guess.
Yep. I mean, once again, I don't know if they fit all in the category of good, bad, or the ugly, as they say. But definitely, over the years of working in different sectors and different industries, there's just you're gonna come across different people, right? Different personality types and things like that. I would start back from when I guess my first job. I don't know, what would you call it, first job? Yeah, I would say it's one of our earlier jobs.
Sure.
Definitely in the schooling years, right?
Okay.
Worked at a gas station, right?
Oh.
The typical job here is full service type of situation, and so yeah, like with that type of remembering back to that time, had a boss. He was pretty neutral, I guess, in all the bosses that I've had after that. This is of course in hindsight. What's the main thing about this boss? I think how he interacted with people.
Okay.
He was one that would be managing two gas stations.
Oh, okay.
And the way that worked was that the gas stations here, they only belong to the company, the big corporations, right?
Right.
What he owns or what he runs is the convenience store that's attached to the gas station.
Oh.
And I don't know if many people know about that. That's usually how all gas stations work. So what he was in charge of was he would be handling, making sure that the convenience store was well stocked, it was staffed, and then the gas company would actually only pay him a very little, I think, for the gas that was actually pumped through the so-called managed store. So he had a lot on his shoulders because he had to make sure that customer service was key and people had a good experience when they're coming into the gas station. But also he had to make sure stuff sold, right? Like he can't just be people gonna come get gas regardless.
Yeah.
So that's why I think that's why the gas companies don't pay these managers very much. Or these owners / managers, right?
Right.
And so his job was to staff other staff the whole gas station, staff the store, and sometimes he would delegate the scheduling to his underlings, right? Because he's running two stores, which is a good insight when you're first kind of coming out to work. Like you're kind of thinking like, okay, I've got this manager or owner that's I interviewed with and I'm working with, and he's definitely knows what he's doing, at least as far as I knew when I was at that age. And then he's not really around, right? I mean,
I see.
That's something that these days I think it's more common, where there's a lot less of the I'm on top of you, I'm micromanaging you, that type of situation.
Yeah.
But back then it was like, oh, this is my first job, or very close to my first job, and there's not much senior guidance there. It's all like self-run, and it was interesting. And I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. Just kind of looking back, that was just one of the ways he was running his two shops.
So it sounds like it's more independent is what you're getting at. Like he kind of left you guys alone because it just the trust was there, right?
Yeah, I think you can say that.
Okay, that's cool.
It's just that's not my first experience with that, right? And it just so happened that with the time, and I don't think this is maybe his fault, or maybe it's not.
Oh,
Obviously, there's with these types of businesses,
right.
they tend to run late into the night,
Oh,
and
yeah.
the people that do work there, not all are above board, right?
Sure.
Some are, I wouldn't say they're bad people, but it's just, yeah, people have
Baggage.
different, like they're obviously, people are going through different stages of their
Sure.
lives. There's
Yeah.
there's young guys that were like me that were working there for like a part-time job or whatnot,
Mhm.
and then there were guys that were like lifers, like people that have been working there for a really long
Yeah.
time, and they'll continue working that job
Right.
indefinitely, even
Right.
though it may seem that they have other prospects, but really in actuality, this is their main go-to job. And with that, because of that situation, there was a lot of stealing that was
Mm.
going on in the background, and
Mhm.
usually it's small stuff, right? Like, candy bar here, drink there. And might I add, because we worked in this situation, we were given like, free drinks, like you
Oh.
drink as much as coffee, or
Oh, sure.
the fountain stuff, that stuff's not worth anything, right? Bottled
Yeah.
stuff is off limits, right?
Okay.
But people start to like steal stuff like candy
Oh,
bars
wow.
and that type of thing, and the way it was handled by my boss, I mean, obviously we didn't see it outright, but the
Mhm.
thing is, I think he sort of turned a blind eye unless it wasn't too crazy,
Right.
so
Yeah.
maybe it was just the environment that it was that he was in, right?
Sure.
And it happened a lot more in the 24-hour places versus the 12-hour ones, because there's two different
Right.
types that run. So
Was
yeah,
this
just
okay?
yeah,
No, sorry, my question
yeah,
was this kind of like predating the more commonality of having, like, the eye in the sky cameras all over the place? Like, was there less of that?
yeah.
Hence, it was easier for some of the not so,
mm.
favorable people to get
There was
away with
there
these kind of
was
things.
there
Mhm.
was definitely cameras, because I think
Mm,
for safety wise,
right, right.
they had to have it, with especially with the late night places, but your cameras are really meant for like the customers.
Yeah, that's true.
The
Yeah,
employees know where all the cameras
that's
are,
right. Yeah,
so
blind
they
spots.
they they will find ways. There are places where there's no there's dead spots, so
Mm-hmm.
people just know, and obviously there's just places where people would like hide things or whatnot and go back and get it later. Like you can kind of tell, like it's
Mm-hmm.
once you've been there for a little bit of time,
Yeah,
like how people run the shop.
absolutely.
Yeah.
Oh, I see. That's interesting.
Yeah,
Okay,
overall that was
cool.
my first experience with the boss, with our boss. I mean, like I
Yeah.
said, didn't see him very much, so other stories later on, I'll have more to share about my experiences with bosses, which there are quite a
Nice.
few
Yeah, yeah,
interesting
definitely.
ones. But then let me pass it over to you.
Okay.
What would be your earlier experience
Wow,
with
yeah.
this?
I think probably one of my earliest jobs, again, also, I think during the school, high school era, was working at a like a, I guess it's like a food industry, fish and chips, small shop kind of thing.
Oh, right.
And
Yeah.
I think it overall wasn't like horrible or anything, but just, I guess the folks that ran it, they're more, I guess, more rough around the edges, right?
Hmm. Yep.
Their attitude is get it done, right? But of course, there's always those work perks where you can eat as many fries as you want, or
Yep.
drink as much fountain pop as you want, right? And when
Yeah.
you're a teenager, you're like, oh yeah, that's great, right? But
Yeah.
there's enough work to work you to the bone. I think my role was a dishwasher, and
Right.
during that period, the interesting thing was, like, my friend and I were both looking for a summer job, and it is the weirdest thing is when you never or haven't previously had any work experience, finding a job can be very difficult. I mean, these days it's probably
Yeah.
easier. I mean, if you know how to drive, you can do Uber, right? So that's great. But
Yeah.
back in the day, it was kind of like, unless it's word of mouth, or you literally went around handing out paper resumes and, cold knocking on
Hmm.
these shops and stores, hoping to get hired or to talk to the manager. I mean, it's an experience. The
Yeah.
interesting thing was, myself and my friend were hired
Hmm.
for the dishwashing role. And that
Yeah.
was fine. And me and my friend were pretty like gung ho, right? There would be
Yeah.
times where because we didn't live too far away, so by bike, we could get there, in a suitable amount of time, and and we would know each other's shifts, and there's always only just one dishwasher running it. So whether it's you're doing like the afternoon shift or the night shift, it's one or the other. And we would visit each other, right? And because we had the same role, we knew how tough it was, right? Because it's grueling, right? When that stuff comes flying in, the expectation is you better be working nonstop, get all those dishes clean and get them back out so that they can keep serving. And so you have to keep that train moving. Obviously, if you don't get it done, you're going to get yelled at, right? But, we did pretty good. Now, here's the interesting part. We would visit each other when we knew each other's shifts and the other one was off, right? And, we'd come in, depending on, say I'm working and my friend would come in and he would, and here's the neat part, like, we would help each other out, right? Even though it's not his shift, he'd be like, because we knew how tough it was, right? So we just help out, like stack the whatever plates or cups or just like, get them sorted so that the person can then work on the other piece. And then we chat, right? So it's like fun, we're young. And of course, because we work there anyway, so, help himself to a little pop and fries. I would do the same thing on the days that he's working. I'd visit him.
Did your manager know that you were doing this though? Like that the two of you were kind of sharing one shift kind of thing?
Well, we weren't doing it every single day. It was just kind of out of the blue, right? And then it got to a point where, like, maybe on the third time, in terms of like once me, once him, and then back to me again, then that's where we got in trouble. And I kind of always thought about it, and I'm like, what's the big deal, right? Like, it's not like you're the owner is paying extra. And but the thing, I don't think it was a money issue. It was more so based on at that time the manager was complaining that we don't want this other person coming in eating up all the fries and drinking all the pop.
Oh my goodness.
We're like, what? I think it would have made more sense if the manager said, hey, look, labor law says we can only have the person that's being paid working and the other person cannot be here. That's a liability. Then we would understand, right? But I guess it's that lack of well-roundedness, and there's just like, that sense of like, I'm your boss, I own you, so get lost kind of thing, or you lose your job. And so we took the hint, but that kind of took a lot of that like momentum out of our work. Like, we didn't mind the hard work, but it was that sense of like, so wow, that's it. Like we bust our chops, and this is your complaint. Is that we're
if anything, you guys would have been doing the job more efficiently because there's two of you doing it, unless there wasn't enough space or unless it was like not safe for two people to be in the area.
But it wasn't like hardcore, like we were splitting the shift from start to beginning, right? It was just a friend dropping by, chit chat for half an hour maybe, and I'm still working. It's not stopping, right? We're not stopping to chat, literally working while chatting. And either way, management didn't like it, and so that ended that. And so thinking back, it wasn't like horrible. What we did found out that at the end of our summer work term, we were screwed out of our last paycheck. So that was a lesson learned. It was. It is. But the thing is, we were kids, right? And so like, even if you go home and tell your parents, they're gonna be like, well, either they may not know what to do, or it might not be worth the hassle. But that it does suck, because that was like literally 2 weeks of hard labor that we didn't get paid for.
No, that's I think even back then I think you're right. I think parents might not know better in that situation. I mean, first of all, the kid probably already feels bad that something's happened with the work they put in and not getting compensated fairly for it. And you're right, folks might not know the best way to handle that. These days it's a little bit easier because you can just go online and you can just kind of search like whatever labor laws or whatnot, and definitely that's pretty wrong. I mean, by a long stretch. Crazy. But that just shows you what type of person that was running the place is.
Totally. And it kind of made sense after we thought back in terms of how vulgar the folks were with each other, and how not just, it made sense. It's kind of like you're working with some shady individuals, That was
Right.
definitely
Right.
the
Right. Right.
feeling. And all they
Yeah.
did was hire high school students, right? Like the
Yeah.
line cook and the chef, they were
Hmm.
both also from the same high school. So
Oh.
like literally everyone's just looking for summer work. And from I
Yeah.
think from the management's perspective, they're like, fish and chips kind of thing.
Yeah.
I guess in my area, it's more seasonal potentially, and so they're
Right.
looking to like just do the season and forget it, whatever, move on. So it's kind of like quick buck kind of thing. But yeah,
Yeah.
they go ahead.
I was just gonna say they're expecting that the turnaround is gonna be high as well. So there
Hmm.
is really no need to treat you guys
Exactly.
like a long-term employee.
Exactly. Base
Yeah.
pay, right?
Yeah.
Like it
I hear you.
wasn't nothing fancy. And the interesting, I don't know if it's karma or not, but they didn't last much longer after that anyways. Like so
Well, not with those business practices. I
yeah.
mean, that's one of the things that,
Hmm.
over the years kind of going through with different bosses in different fields.
Yeah.
It's like how you treat other people makes a big difference.
Hmm.
And I would say, I almost wanted to say like, hey, it really has to do with the industry, but or
Hmm.
maybe the managers, like from
Yeah.
from a point of view, you would almost want to say like, oh, because of their background or what industry you're in, that makes a good or bad boss. But that's not the case.
Not
I mean,
yeah.
like I've worked in situations where you know that your manager or the owner didn't have much of a good upbringing or whatnot, but if they
Yeah.
treat people right,
Sure.
and
Yeah.
they did fairly by people, it
Exactly.
goes a long way,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah.
Then someone that say like, I don't know, could have the best education and had
But
the
still
best
be
upbringing, they could
yeah.
probably still be a dick
Yeah.
for for for
Exactly.
for a manager. So that actually doesn't really play it. As getting older, that has taught me that that's really
Agree.
not deciding factor.
Agree. And
But do you
mhm.
feel like once you met him for the first time, like when you were so-called interviewed or when you were talking to him, did you already get a feeling that it wasn't he wasn't
No.
quite the best boss? Like, does that come across to you?
No, because I think those people will have their game faces on, right? They'll be all smiley, right? That kind of thing. So you never really
Okay.
know anyone for that matter until you go through tough times, right? That's where
Okay.
true character
Yeah.
comes out. I think that's a recurring theme, at least from my experience. And then also back to your point earlier is, um, what I find interesting looking back at multiple jobs that I have is no matter how horrific that job may have been,
Yeah.
there's always good people there, right? It
Yeah.
may not be management, it could be part of management, but
Hmm.
there's always some very decent human beings there that you can click with.
Yeah. Yeah.
And
Hmm.
like you probably both parties know that, what, we're just doing this because it's a job, not because we love it, right? And
Yeah.
there's that
Yeah.
sentimentality. Yeah.
For sure. For sure.
Hmm.
Yeah, no, that's true. I mean, I was just more kind of thinking of like after I know after in hindsight you realize he wasn't the greatest manager.
Sure.
Obviously, he didn't pay you for the last you know
Yeah.
uh, uh, segment of your work and
Hmm.
everything like that.
Hmm.
But knowing that and then looking back at when he first interviewed you, could you tell how
Too
much of
young.
an act he was putting up?
No,
Like,
too young, because for
oh
first
yeah, yeah,
off,
yeah.
when
Okay.
you're again first job too, right? Like you're
Hmm.
gonna, I don't know, maybe it's cultural, right? Depending
Yeah.
on, your cultural background, what your parents teach you is acceptable or not acceptable.
Hmm.
A lot of times, at least from my parents' perspective, they're kind of like, what, the world is not all roses and flowers, right? You're gonna
Right.
have to put up with stuff, especially if
Yeah.
you want to get
Yeah.
the experience. And that's kind of the thing, right?
Yeah.
It's that trade-off. And you can only imagine if a person was like an immigrant or something like that and didn't have any local work
Yeah.
experience, you can
Yeah.
understand how badly they would get exploited by bad employers, right?
Oh, I've
um
I've heard stories about that.
yeah,
Absolutely, it happens. It
same
happens
type of thing.
all the time. They
Yeah.
they threaten them with like
Oh,
basically because
deportation
because
or
they have
whatever
yeah, yeah, yeah.
potentially,
Oh,
right?
because
Yeah.
if they don't hold down their job,
Yeah.
they have to leave, right?
Yeah.
So they definitely there a lot of managers hired these people just because of that, and they have it basically hang over their head all the
Mhm.
time. And I know this is not just in our country.
No.
I mean, it's probably worse in some other countries as
Exactly.
well, or
Yeah.
or it happens everywhere.
Hmm.
Um, but seeing it firsthand is also it's pretty brutal, right? Like it's just you you kind of feel it. Like, and those people, and that's the thing. A lot of times you see it. Those people are like the ones that probably work the hardest, right? Are
Mm-hmm.
the nicest,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Absolutely.
And would are willing to help you out when you're the new guy when you're coming in too. So
Yes.
yeah,
Yes.
like that's the crazy thing, right? It's
Yeah.
like it's like the guy that treats you the best there is like the guy that's like being threatened the most by the employer.
Yeah,
Yeah.
maybe it's that, like, again, that sentimentality where you recognize another soul, right? That is, has common. Oh, you're here too because you need the money, and
Yeah.
they know you're not the enemy, right? Like,
Yep.
and that's the thing. I mean, if anything, if I were to potentially tie that back to like some kind of Bitcoin stuff, is that's the thing is, if you treat management as this like a form of government, right? And the
Yeah.
people that are working there are the citizens. Like, if they were really to band together, the citizens would be extremely overpowering. It's just always
Oh
that,
yeah. Yeah.
the management or government will always try to split people up so they don't have the ability to unite. And so
Yep.
there's that aspect at play as well. Politics, right?
Pretty,
That's what they call it.
pretty much like a union, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
having a union,
Yeah.
usually, people get better wages.
Yep.
People, they are heard more often. I'm not saying
Mm-hmm.
I'm on one side or the other.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, for a lot of the reasons, a lot of times, certain industries definitely need it,
Yeah.
and then some industries don't need it.
Sure.
And so there is a time and place for everything.
Yeah.
But you're right. Yeah, it's just with relation to a lot of the management, it is there are a lot of them are like small countries and
Mm-hmm.
small towns, basically
Yeah.
governed and run by one person that's providing the money,
Right.
providing your livelihood,
Yep.
providing basically your next meal.
Mm-hmm.
And how do you what do you do? You have to listen, right? Even though you know they're in the wrong, you know what
Yeah.
they're doing is not exactly on the up and up,
Right.
and they don't have your best interest in mind. You know
Mm-hmm.
all that stuff, but what
Mm-hmm.
do? You can't just walk away,
Yeah.
right? You have other people that depend on you,
Exactly.
and that kind of goes back to like, well, how's that relate to our own government and other governments out there, and how they handle our livelihood, right?
Mm-hmm.
Our savings for retirement,
Sure.
our
Yeah.
our savings period, right?
Yeah. I
Their
think
interest rates and things like that.
for sure. If anything, I think, like, having bad experiences is one thing. It's, some people used to say, or have heard that, oh, builds character, you got to stick it through. And but what I find
Yeah,
maybe more to how I see things is, it's not so much about building character. It's more so about
yeah,
understanding yourself, right?
yeah.
Understanding
Hmm.
where you set your limits, what things you're willing to accept, and at what point you're like, no, that's it, right?
That's true.
um
That's true.
and
I
it's,
agree on that.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
that self definition is when you're
Hmm.
young, you're starting out, you have no idea, blank slate, and
Hmm.
those experiences will then shape how exactly you approach things, right?
Yeah.
Can you step back and see it from the other side of things? Does it make sense when you do that, or is it still wrong, right? And it kind of
Yeah.
pushes those boundaries, or those types of thoughts, at least,
Yeah, no, that's very true. I think the whole process of this, and I would even tie that into going into post-secondary education. It's
Mm-hmm.
about learning oneself, really,
Yeah.
as cliche or as cheesy as that sounds, because
Mm-hmm.
what you're learning through either your job currently right now
Yeah.
or education doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be strictly applicable
Agree.
down the road in terms of like that particular job, what it's teaching you, right? Let's say,
Mm-hmm.
for example, you're dishwashing and me pumping gas.
Sure.
Those are not things that would directly impact, but what will help impact is how you interact with the people,
Yes.
right? That's something that you learn on the job, and
Mm-hmm.
with retail or customer facing jobs, you're gonna also get that customer
Oh,
person to person
yeah.
relationship, and those go a long ways. I think
Mm-hmm.
that's where maybe back then, at least, it wasn't talked about as much. It wasn't defined as much as
Mm-hmm.
to me anyways. It wasn't like, hey, look, you're gonna go through some tough times, right? And that's fine, but you have to learn and get the most out of it for
Yes.
yourself. I think that's what I would go back and tell
Yes.
myself back then. Like notice, use the time there. If you're bored, if you hate your job, think about all the things that you can be learning while you're there anyways. I
Hmm.
think that goes a long ways in terms of like helping you develop yourself
Absolutely.
and prepare for you for the next job or the next problem that comes your way. Because
Hmm.
it's like, how do you handle it, and what can I learn from this experience, right?
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah, that's what I think. It's really the. I mean, we can go in more to that if that comes up to be a good topic. I mean,
Hmm.
it might be something that I would probably, yeah, once again, tell myself back then if I had a chance to, right?
Yeah, absolutely. It's like when you're in the thick of it, and that's the thing. It's so hard, and that's what I guess also that's where I've also heard people say you got to step back, right? You got to step back and like
Yeah,
look at yourself objectively, or like almost as if you're the narrator, right?
yeah,
And
yeah.
and be able to look at your own character and what situation you're in, and be able to say, does this make sense? Right?
Mm,
Is this where I want to be? Is this what's next? Is there better? Right? And there has to be moments of stepping back and doing that self-reflection. Otherwise, being too deep in it and not thinking, then nothing's going to change, right? I think that's one of the lessons that I learned is no one's there looking out for you. Absolutely none, right? You'd
yeah.
be lucky to come across some good people that will be your guide or teach you in a good way, to avoid certain mistakes or whatever, right? Like a mentor. Those are valuable, and
Yeah.
that's 100%. But
So
most
so
of the
so
folks, yeah, go ahead.
sorry. So do you think that if you were to go back and you could mentor yourself, do you
Hmm.
think yourself back then would listen? Like depending on what you know now, obviously. Like why I ask this is because it's like, okay, if we try to teach someone younger than us right now,
Right.
would we be able to get through to them, or would they just be like, oh, this is just some old guy just telling
Right.
me,
Okay.
their past history doesn't apply to me these days. Like, it's all about like, whatever it may be, chasing clout or like
Yeah.
some
Just some
some
old
new
fart.
new trend on TikTok or whatever, right?
Yeah.
Do you think that's relevant? I mean, not relevant in say, but for your own self in this
Hmm.
era, if you were younger. I know this is really convoluted, but I'm
Sure.
just curious. Like,
So scenario, if I get it straight, I'm not time traveling. I'm
yeah,
an old dude, old fart, coming up to this
yeah,
youngster who's supposedly
yeah,
me, right? And
yeah.
then giving words of wisdom, that kind of thing, right? I I I
Exactly.
I would kind of relate it to like trying to orange pill someone on Bitcoin. It's if they
Hmm.
want to listen, they'll listen and they'll ask questions. But
Yeah.
they if they think what you're saying is just gas, they'd be like, whatever, leave me alone, right? What do you know? Look at you,
Yeah.
right? You're not doing any better.
Mhm.
Like that's an automatic response for some people, right? And
Right.
it depends on timing and situation. If their career is great, they're like, well, who are you to tell me? But if
Yeah.
you catch them in a moment where they're potentially in despair and you're trying to offer, words of wisdom or offer kindness or hope,
Mhm.
they might be more willing to listen. So it's really dependent on the person, first and foremost, how receptive they are to advice in general. Maybe they don't
Yeah.
want any. Some people are very independent. They're like, hey, this is my life. I'm going to live it my way. You keep your
Mhm.
advice to yourself. Some other people are in between, and some other people are more on the other extreme where they're like willing to listen to any advice. Whether they take it
Yeah.
is a different thing. But I would kind of look
Right.
at it that way. If it was myself, I would have to consider the fact that I'd be some youngster hothead. It depends on, I guess, my approach in terms of what
Yeah.
angle I'm coming from, right? If I'm coming out of the
Right.
blue, just trying to forewarn, like maybe if for example, if I knew that job I had back then was really bad and I wanted to go back in a different body, but in a way go back in time to warn myself,
Yeah.
would my then self listen? It's
That's
hard to
true.
say, right? It's like, because when you're in the thick of it, it's like, well, this old man seems to mean well, but he doesn't know who I am. He's a stranger. So I
Yeah.
mean, I might listen, but I might not realize those words ring true until I finish the experience. Similar
That's
to
true.
kind of
That's
like
true.
parenting, right? sometimes
yeah,
your parents try their best to give you that advanced wisdom or knowledge, but a lot of times you brush it off when you're young. You're like, whatever, right? I
yeah,
know what I'm doing, especially when you're a teenager. And so that's the thing. It's only when you get through later stages of life and you reflect that you're like,
yeah.
you know what? I remember somebody telling me I shouldn't have done this, or I should have done this instead. And that's when it clicks. And I guess that's hindsight for you, right?
Yeah,
There are folks that I bet out there that are more receptive to the
yeah.
critical thinking faster, where they're like, this person said something to me. They saw something. Should I be thinking at things at a different angle? Maybe I should consider what they saw. How
Yeah,
does that apply? Does it make sense? And I think those people would be able to move ahead sooner, right? Rather than being stuck
yeah,
in the situation that they are.
yeah. Because it really does relate back to Bitcoin, because it's the
Mm.
same situation we're facing right now,
Mm-hmm.
which is, we want to tell people about what the future may bring, although we're not fortune tellers, right? And
Hope.
obviously not
Yeah.
financial advice, but
No.
you want to share the importance of this technology and how important it is to at least look into it, right? And that's the
Mm-hmm.
feeling I'm getting, is that if we try too hard,
Mm-hmm.
are we having an adverse effect on people
Yeah.
wanting to look into it? Because I'm not even telling them to go into, like, I'm talking about someone totally not into it,
Yeah.
not doesn't care, thinks it's another thing that's just kind of floating around,
Bad.
and
Yeah.
you want them to be like, hey, no, like take a look at this, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's worth your time, and it's just that point. The people I'm trying to talk to are totally just ignoring it right off the bat, because they've heard
Sure.
so many weird things out there
Yeah.
that's been happening. People
Right.
losing money, people
Right.
doing all these weird things with other crypto
Scams.
coins and whatnot, and
Sure.
and they don't even want to give it the time and day,
Mm-hmm.
to even just listen to, like, hey, you might just want to look into this. And that's the challenge that I see.
Absolutely.
How do we even talk about the subject when once they hear a whiff of like, the scent of, hey, you're talking about, Bitcoin, or you're talking about like any type of crypto at all, and
Exactly.
and it just automatically defaults to,
Ponzi.
I'm turning you off. Like, you can tell, on their face, they're like,
Yeah.
I'm turning you off right now.
Yeah.
Right.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. The meme is, oh, that's great. How was the game last night? Did you catch the game
Yeah.
last night? Right. That's the meme.
Exactly.
Um.
Yeah.
And that's the thing. It's absolutely like oh man, I had a thought. It left my
Yeah, it's a
mind.
tough one. It's just one of those situations where we want more people to be, like, involved in it, right? Like I said, I always come across as, like, I'm not trying to force this on you
No.
in any ways. I don't want to come across as preaching either, because I feel like that has some adverse effects on a lot of people that are borderline already. And those are actually the better ones, because at least they're thinking about it, right?
Sure.
But I sometimes you really want to have the conversation about, to other people, be like, hey, no, like, yes, there's a lot of things that are out there. Some of it's true, some of it's not, and they're looking at me like, why is this guy talking to me in this foreign language?
Right. Oh,
And
I
yeah,
remember
sorry,
the
go ahead.
thought. The thought
Oh yeah,
is
yeah,
here's the point is inflation, right? I would argue if inflation wasn't as bad as it is now, right? Even though it's underreported, um,
yeah,
people wouldn't. I would think less people would be paying attention, like a lot less, right? It's I think
yeah,
nowadays because there's that rampant understanding that there's inflation, and it's not like because the media, traditional media, is telling everyone, oh, there's no inflation. People know it. They go buy. You go to
yeah,
Starbucks, right? It's
yeah,
not. It's
yeah,
not back in the day. What it was $3 a drink. Many
yeah,
years ago, sure. Nowadays, it's
yeah.
like eight to $10 a drink,
Yep,
right?
yep, yep.
The drink hasn't changed. I
Nope,
order the
nope.
same drink, right? Big Mac, same thing, right?
Yep,
Um,
yep. That's right.
and so it doesn't matter how they get their news or what the news tells them. If they go and buy eggs or butter or a Big Mac and it's costing more, they know it. Whether they want
Yeah.
to accept that fact, whether they want to investigate or understand why that's happening, that's separate, right? But I would
Mhm.
argue that the folks that are strapped for cash or closer to being strapped for cash would
Yeah.
definitely wonder what is going on. Especially, you think about it. If I was still a dishwasher and I'm just making barely enough to pay my bills and buy groceries, I'm going to be questioning, why does the butter cost $8 now? What changed?
Yeah.
Right? What is the butter better? No, it tastes the same, right? It's the same ingredients. So why does it cost $8? And if that doesn't spark someone to ask why, to even just Google search what is inflation or why does butter cost more, then that's on them. I mean, it's I mean, I think when we learn about Bitcoin, or anyone that goes down the rabbit hole, it's very hard for us not to educate. I don't like the word preach, because preach sounds like you know it all. Educate, right? Help guide people like a mentor, or at least point them in the right direction instead of misleading people, right? It's like someone not knowing, they're lost and they're like, hey, can you help me? I want to get to here. I mean, well, okay, that it might be in that direction, but you're still going to have to go down that path yourself and find out, right?
There's also sorry, I just wanted to interject one thing. There's also the, like, I mean, you brought up a really good point about people, like worry about, their next purchase of like necessities, right? And I think that's a really strong point, and something to talk about is for people that are really strapped and they're really looking at the necessities being so expensive already. How would you talk to them about like even going to buying Bitcoin or using Bitcoin? Because they don't. I mean, it's tough, right?
Oh, absolutely. How do you even?
They already don't have, because Bitcoin is supposed to be you buy and you hold.
Yes.
Right. You're really never supposed to use it because there's no point in it. It's I wouldn't say it's deflationary, but it's definitely counter inflation, right? In its own sense.
You wouldn't use it immediately, right? If you're not in a economic state of affairs where you have enough to spend, first and foremost, again, we gotta put the disclaimer of, it's not financial advice, folks, right?
Yeah, of course.
But from my perspective, that's why the media likes to call it a narrative, but it makes the most sense to treat Bitcoin as an asset, something that you want to hold value with. Now, you're right, going back to your point, if someone's strapped for cash and they have barely enough to even make ends meet, how are they going to buy any Bitcoin? They can't. So right off the bat, I think it's been called out in a few podcasts where the very poor, they're not getting it through exchanging their fiat for Bitcoin. What they can potentially hope for is if the world gets to a point where people can find jobs or do jobs or gigs where they pay in Bitcoin, and those do exist. Okay, it does require a bit of searching, and depending on the location, whether that's being offered, right? But those do exist, and if you can do a gig, whether that be like, be a farmhand or do construction work, day labor, whatever, you can make some Bitcoin that way. But then again, that's on that person, right? Like, that's assuming they're not doing their day job, it's their weekend and they're doing extra work to make Bitcoin. It can be done, but it depends on that person. If they're so strapped that even on weekends they're working a second job already and they're still barely making enough, there's no way they're going to be like, oh yeah, like I'm gonna go buy some Bitcoin. It's not reasonable. Although, bias aside, right, Bitcoin in theory is infinitely divisible, right? For those that are mathematically inclined, if you take a calculator and you divide 1 divided by 2 on the calculator, and you keep hitting the equal sign over and over, it basically repeats that. So the answer, the result gets divided by 2 again. You can go to infinity. You can keep pressing that. It'll never end. And the reason behind that is, in math, you can divide a whole number by a fraction, by half, by a third, by whatever. It'll never reach 0 because you're constantly left with something left over to divide with, or to divide by, or to divide with. You'll get infinitely close to 0, but it never reaches 0. Now, why does that matter with Bitcoin? Bitcoin is up to 8 decimal places. So there's a bias, inherent bias with a lot of newcomers is, I want to hold Bitcoin. Well, most people can't, because it's like, what is it right now? The price is about maybe 59K, 60K USD. Who's got that much? You got that much, you don't need, you're already well off, right? If so really the hurdle is understanding that you got to get over that bias. Don't look at the decimal places. Just basically think about it as whatever fraction you can get, just get some. Again, not financial advice, but for someone that's like,
start somewhere. So basically, have to start somewhere. Like, if you're not in a position to save at all, then I guess unfortunately you're out of the race until you can either up yourself in making more money, making some changes in your life to save money, right? Like, either you're cutting out your extraordinary fun expenses or whatnot, to save that and start aiming towards that, I guess.
Like, we took an extreme, like, to the same example. If I was homeless, how would I save in Bitcoin? Let's not even talk about Bitcoin at that point, right? I'd be rolling my eyes if I was homeless, and I'd be like, just give me some food or get lost, right? Like, that's why the poor always get shafted, right? And as inflation goes up, more and more people become borderline because the wages don't chase. So there's that aspect.
Unfortunately, that's one of the cases. Yeah, I think I know this episode is supposed to be more about bad bosses, but as always, things do tie back in to Bitcoin.
Indeed.
And how that reflects upon our view of either current situations, past situations, and of course future situations as well too. Maybe we can continue this topic more next time.
I definitely got a whole bunch more bad boss, good boss, lessons learned. We just started, so definitely.
Same here.
Awesome. All right, we'll call it here. All right, thanks a lot.
Thank you.